Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by Beavers Edge writer and KGO radio host TJ Mathewson, back here on the big podcast. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the Edge podcast. We'll be breaking down part of the Beavers Edge top 25 today as we count down the 25 players we've ranked for Oregon State football leading into this season. It's summertime, so TJ and I are going to be breaking down the list. We'll go talk some guys, and we'll do a couple of these throughout the next couple of weeks and leading up to fall camp and preview the whole list. But good to talk to you guys again. TJ, what's going on, man? You enjoying the summer? I know it's nice to see some nice weather out here in Oregon.
Yeah, happy summer, buddy. It's vacation coming up here in a couple days. Gonna be pretty nice. Gonna enjoy a nice long 4th of July weekend. Gonna head back up into the Seattle area. Should be good. But yeah, good to be back, buddy. Good to be back. Good to be summer as well. It's a little bit slower. Not as much to keep our eyes on, but makes it a little bit more relaxing. Catch up on some sleep. Except for you, of course. You got to get up early.
See, more nap times in the afternoon, right? No,
that's true. That's true.
No, it's like I said, it's call me little or whatever. But yeah, since I've started doing morning radio, just like that little hour nap is just it's needed each day just to kind of get the engine still firing to make it through the course of a day. But this time of year, it's great, especially when it's sunny outside. And like I said, Oregon State's obviously building their 2024 recruiting class, had lots of recruiting updates, and make sure to stay logged to BeaversEdge.com. We've had a couple 2023 commits lately too, some receivers that'll be joining the Beavers this summer and going to be making the fall camp roster, obviously. And TJ and I will be previewing the start of fall camp and all that fun stuff as it gets closer. I know I'm getting excited. DJU, Oregon State football, 2023 coming off a 10-win season. It feels like the Vegas Bowl was just yesterday in a lot of ways, and here we are just, end of June, just right around the corner. But let's not wish away the rest of summer just yet. And again, as we mentioned here on the top of the podcast, we're going to kind of break down the Beavers Edge top 25 in stages this year. We're going to add the video element to it. Again, the Beavers Edge top 25 right now, number 21 through 25, and the honorable mentions are posted. So go ahead and check those out. And we wanted to add a little video element this year, TJ and I, as we develop the list together this year, breaking down, how the list is, how we feeling about each guy, and kind of just giving some general thoughts on the list as we approach the start of fall camp. And TJ, let's go ahead and head on over to the honorable mentions and the just missed list. Let's go ahead and start with the just missed this year. We got tight end Riley Sharp, who just moved over to the position from outside linebacker, new defensive line addition, Oluwaseyi Amatosho. Pretty sure I have this last name correct there. Going to go by
I think you nailed it.
Yeah. From what I've heard, he goes by Olu, so it's going to be real easy there, TJ. Outside linebacker Corey Stover, inside linebacker John Miller, running back Isaiah Newell, tight end Jermaine Terry, and defensive back Achille Arnold. Those were the guys that TJ and I couldn't quite squeeze into the honorable mentions. They were on that next list. TJ, what are some thoughts you have on that group? Despite being just outside the honorable mention, still some talented pieces there who I think will still play a sizable role for Oregon State football this year.
Would you take at this point, if Olu reaches the expectations, I would imagine he would, if we were to do a postseason top 25 after this year, I think you would imagine he would be one of the top 25 players on this roster. I would think. We just haven't watched him play yet, so in meaningful games outside of practice. So I don't think we can meaningfully put him on there. Again, he might have the talent to do so.
100%. There's a couple guys like that. I mean, TJ mentioned Olu comes in again, just off the top of my head. I believe he was close to double-digit sacks at Wyoming this last year. Again, it's either 7.5 or 9.5. Don't have his numbers exactly in front of me at the moment, but very effective season, very effective edge rush. The Beavers are very pleased with what he's going to bring to the table. And TJ's right. I think he's a guy that definitely could be top 25 end of the season or even leaning into next year's rankings. The unknown for him. Another guy for me that is kind of in that mix, John Miller could end up starting at one of the inside linebacker spots. The reason we have him on the just missed right now is, that spot's still a little in flux. We're not sure quite who's going to be the starter there. Otherwise, I could see John Miller getting in that mix. Again, the pride of Tualatin, Oregon. Got to give him a shout out. I think he could be on that mix. And then to an extent, maybe Jermaine Terry.
I was about to say that too. I was going to say, make a similar comparison once we get into 21 to 25. But at this moment, we can just hang out here with Jermaine Terry. I mean, most of that tight end production is up for grabs. A little bit of it from Luke Musgrave last year. We got the hit or miss of Jack Velling. Some games you'd pop, some games you would not. But now that you got your guy behind center, and you might want to, the balance of pass and run might be similar, but you're going to want to take a few more high danger throws, I guess, over the middle with the arm talent you have under center with DJ. That's going to make the tight end pretty important. And Jermaine Terry, when we saw him in the spring, flashed some pretty good speed for the tight end position, and that leaves a lot of upside there.
He did, and I'm curious to kind of see, because the Beavers really seem to put their tight ends, for lack of better terms, into two groups. They have guys that are more receivers and guys who are more blockers. And I think we saw this last year, like Jake Overman, not going to offer a ton in the receiving department. Maybe it's them not using him. I'm not going to say he's lack of, ability, but for whatever reason, he had 50 some receiving yards this last year, but he was a tremendous blocker. We saw Jack Velling handle most of the receiving duties. This year, I expect Overman to be a stud and kind of be that number one tight end as far as the lead blocker goes, and kind of have Jack Velling be in the mix too. That's where the interesting thing is with Jermaine Terry and Riley Sharp. What are each of them going to bring to that position? It's almost where, it's interesting. Could you see like Riley Sharp being more of a blocker for how big he is, and maybe Terry, like we said, is going to be more of the receiving threat? Heck, we could even see Jake Overman get thrown to a lot more this year if DJ, or insert quarterback here. I'm going to spoil it for everybody. TJ and I think it's going to be DJ, but it's not set in stone. So we have to say, insert quarterback here. But no, I think the tight ends will be used a lot more this year. And I think there's a lot of talent there. So, that's as the list runs down. I mean, Isaiah Newell, I think he's got the talent to be top 25 too, but he's, buried on a depth chart full of really good running backs. And, that's just the way that cookie crumbles. And Achille Arnold, I think, he's a very solid defensive back. He really kind of played that extra safety this last year. But with Alton Julian being back in the mix and Katano Oladapo, both those guys probably figuring to get most of the run at safety, especially if Alton is back and healthy. Achilles kind of as that reserve safety again this year. But again, it's, go back and look at like the Beavers Edge top 25 just missed 3-4 years ago, where maybe that group didn't have as much. Like I said, I think it's this team, the more and more talented it gets harder and harder to trim it down to 25 guys. You know what I mean, TJ?
Yeah. And that's obviously something you'd have a little bit more, a little bit better memory than I would.
Sure.
Yeah, this is still a really good group of guys. I mean, even if we want to get over to our honorable mentions of, like the talent level of some of these guys. I mean, we have Aiden Childs on our honorable mentions. I think I wouldn't be shocked if we're going to get some pushback that some people might think Aiden Childs is already top 25 on this roster from, the stuff that we've seen.
Yeah.
And I'd say, talent-wise, watching him on the field, I'd say it was a pretty good shot. He's one of the 25 best players on this roster. If you made that case to me, I'm not so certain I'm pushing back, and he could be even higher than just, around the edge of the top 25. That talent level is pretty good. But as all of we know, there's, two guys in front of him on the depth chart. He might not play a single snap this year, in which case it's kind of hard to justify a top 20 spot for Aiden Childs as well. And Josiah Irish, sneaky. I mean, that dude is so fast.
Yeah.
And he's quite the weapon that you could have on offense, and certainly has a chance to earn himself a top 25 role if they find some ways to use him.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said on Childs. I mean, I go with the eye test, TJ, and don't get me wrong, that kid dazzled. I think he is everything that is going right with Oregon State football personified into a recruit person, whatever, you want to say. I think he really represents the future of this program. With that being said, he was never not really the third quarterback all spring. And that's not like we would expected him to be, but it was pretty clearly Ben, DJ, and then Aiden kind of ran against the third team defense with, a mix of twos and threes. I mean, TJ, you were at some practices too this spring. Does that kind of line up with what you were seeing out there? And, with that, I know he stole the show at the spring game. And again, this is not it's nothing negative here. I love Aiden Childs. I think he's going to be a really good player. I just don't know if he's going to be a really good player and the best quarterback on the roster come September 3rd, 4th.
Yeah,
3rd, 4th.
I mean,
yeah,
he was occasionally throwing, I think, to second teamers on offense, but
sure.
In terms of defense, first of all, in spring, they'll dial some of those guys back, and you really won't get to see too much of all-out first-team play on defense, especially in the latter half, which I got to see more of than the first half.
Sure.
So it's like it is a balance there. So I would say you're probably right.
I mean, you and I broke it down at the spring game, man. I mean, you and I absolutely saw that, there's no question. Aiden Childs, best quarterback on the field that day. As far as consistency, the oohs, the ahs, the throws, again, like TJ said, you could pick it apart if you wanted by, who he was going against, this and that. But there is something for the it factor. And I really do think that, like, it's one of those things where, I've been interviewed, by a few other, radio outlets, talking about the Beavers this year, and, been asked questions about Aiden Childs, and my opinion kind of hasn't changed. I think the Childs era is building and it's coming. I just don't think it's going to be quite ready to overtake, DJ, or, even if, if in some world DJ's not the guy enough to beat out Ben, who went 7-1 last year. And you could still tell there was a pecking order from the coaching staff that, and even DJ, like, to an extent, like, there was an extent that DJ had to prove he was going to beat out Ben. And many times last year where we saw kind of Ben in spring still get the nod. So there's definitely something where Ben endeared himself to his teammates this last year. That 7-1 record as a starter really stands out, obviously. So, they're kind of threading the needle a little bit, TJ. And I think, I don't think it's a contentious quarterback room at all, but my opinion hasn't changed, where I still think ultimately come that game against San Jose State, it will be DJ under center. But surprises happen, and that's why we got Aiden, just right where he is, because I think his future is coming very quickly, and I'm very excited about it. Rounding out the honorable mentions real quick, both specialists, we got Everett Hayes coming in as the kicker, Josh Green stepping into the punter spot after Luke Loescher's graduation this last year, and then Grant Stark, who is likely to be the quote-unquote sixth man of the offensive line, at least in our thinking early at this moment before they get into the nitty-gritty of fall camp. Just some quick thoughts on Stark, and before we get into the specialists. Stark was one of the high-profile offseason transfers, comes in from Nevada, lots of experience, and I really think he could actually be in the mix to be one of the starters. However, Oregon State's offensive line has been so elite for so many seasons now, and when you consider that they're the five guys that we've got in the mix that we expect to start have started games for Oregon State in the past, that kind of gives the nod right now. But again, this is all very subjective and could change. I think, Stark is going to be a tremendous guy to have available if anybody goes down or anything like that, because, it's hard to find plug and play offensive linemen sometimes.
We saw a lot of the second team in spring. So it's Stark off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and read my notebook, but he was in there a little bit during the spring. I feel like it's kind of hard to judge performance in spring practice of an offensive line.
It is.
But yeah, you're right. There really is no more valuable commodity in football than line depth. There's not. So it's good. It should be good to watch, and I'm sure Jonathan Smith is, when he got that commitment, is just thrilled. The ability to have someone who could play multiple spots on the offensive line, and I know a lot of these guys we've heard a lot of the guys along the offensive line mention that they feel like they all could play most spots along that line, and I think that's really what. Yeah, I really think that's valuable along this offensive line, and Stark is ready to fill that role because someone's going to get hurt. It's going to happen. Someone's going to go down with injury. And it's just the question of how good's the guy there to fill in, and they feel confident in him. And we'll see really how that group meshes and how they match up with this defensive line come fall.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just impressive to me that Oregon State, even this last year, you lose Brenden Kipper, who was, a big time, just, I mean, an awesome interview. I love talking to Brenden. B, just a very, culture keeper type of leader with the team, and Oregon State's still, projecting to have a really good offensive line. I think it just speaks to the depth that Coach Michalczyk has built up there. Josh Green, I know those listening probably don't know a whole lot about Josh Green, as he's kind of been waiting in the wings for a couple years. The behind the scenes look at that is that Josh Green has been competing with Luke Loescher, pretty much open competition the last 2 years. Loescher's been just a little bit better, or was just a little bit better, and I think that's why he won the job ultimately. But Jonathan, said this offseason that complete faith in Josh Green. We saw some pretty good punts from him in spring. We do see a lot of special teams work in spring from time to time. So, I think Beaver fans can expect very similar to what we've seen with Luke Loescher, with Josh Green. I think he's going to be just as reliable for Oregon State in that regard. Everett Hayes, this is the second straight year he makes the list on the honorable mention. There's no question, TJ, he's got to be better this year for Oregon State. He goes just 6 of 13 this last year, 46%. He dealt with a groin injury, was out for a couple weeks. He split some time with Atticus Sappington. Both those guys split some time in spring. Josh McCormick was in the mix as well. Bottom line with Oregon State's kickers, Everett Hayes still offers the highest upside. He's got the best distance, the best consistency, the most reliability that I've seen when he's healthy. However, we've also seen that Everett's prone to some inconsistency. We've seen him, miss some 30-yarders in practice before and some other things. So I think more than anything, Everett needs to get back to where he was in 2021 as opposed to how he was in 2022. The injury is a big part of that, and I think that kind of limited him last year. But, TJ, as far as when you're looking at holes with Oregon State last year, the passing game was one. The kicking game was another.
And it was probably the second most important one.
Yeah.
That was, post-game, bowl game press conference, or no, was it pre-spring? I think it might have been pre-spring. I mean, you're asking Jonathan, like, how do you view this kicking situation?
I remember that. Yes.
It's nice to have a reliable kicker because you have a kicker you don't have to worry about. You don't you don't even think about it. The guy's just going off. He's practicing on the side in practice. When you run your special teams drills, he'll jog out there and he'll drill however long the field goal is. But there questions arose all season about the consistency of the kicking game. And for Oregon State, who had it going on to winning 10 games last year, had a couple close games, had to swing their way. What happens when you have 3 less points on the board when you in those games when your kicker yanks a 30-yarder? I mean, that can't happen. So, at this point, if he goes 6 of 13 again, there's probably going to be another kicker in here next fall.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, and I believe Everett's a senior this year. Don't quote me on that.
So there would be a new one there anyway. In another, the leash could also be short.
Right. I mean,
sometimes as simple as that. You've seen in the NFL. I mean, it's not the NFL, but.
No, it could be. I mean, that's the thing, though, TJ, is I'm not trying to be critical, but based on what we've seen, can we say Atticus Sappington or Josh McCormick would offer more than Everett at this juncture?
No.
So, and again, just what we've seen with our own eyes in spring, again, anybody could, again, Oregon State's got the very famous case of kickers who have maybe started their career slow and worked on things and what have you. But it'll be interesting. That's an area that I'm keeping an eye on this year, because it was a bit of a concern this last year, and TJ laid it out very perfectly. And I think, the pressure will be on Everett to just be, he doesn't need to be perfect, but 46% is not good. Like,
no,
like that's, that he needs to at least be good. I mean, even if he made 75% of his kicks, I think the Beavers would be happy with that. 70%.
And thinking about it this way too, the goal for Oregon State this year is like 11 wins.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's probably the goal.
Pac-12
make the Pac-12 championship.
Yes, that's probably the goal.
Like, what level, do the Beavers have enough talent on this roster to overcome mediocre kicking to win 11 games?
That is a fantastic question, and it's not a cut and dry answer right now. I would lean yes, but knowing that Oregon State is not never, but just compared to the teams they're competing with this year, TJ, they don't have the most talented roster. They have the roster that is maybe one of the most well coached, one of the most we know how to get the most out of these guys. We know how to put these guys in better positions than that coaching staff does. That's what Oregon State's about. It's about being creative on how you overcome talent disadvantages. And, don't get me wrong. You look at where Oregon State is now. I mentioned it on the top 25. Oregon State is closing the gap on those talent advantages in a big way. And Jonathan has done that in a big way. And that's what's going to allow you to have what TJ mentioned, the opportunity to come in at a 10 or 11 win season potentially. But he's right. For Oregon State to have a 10 win or 11 win season, almost everything has to go right. Is there,
right.
And that's where it's like, is Everett good enough? I think he can be, because we've seen it. We've seen him hit big kicks. He, in altitude, kicked a 60-yarder against Colorado. This is the kid who hit a game-winning kick to beat Washington 2 years ago. So he has the big moments. I think he can thrive. I'm leaning more towards, I don't think he was ever really 100% healthy after that injury last year. I don't think the depth behind him is, proven, we'll say at this point, or was experienced enough. So I'm curious to see how it goes this year. I think Everett will have a better year, but for the reasons TJ just mentioned, it will be fascinating to see, because Oregon State really can't afford to have a lapse in that area. So let's go ahead and switch gears, as they so say, and go to number 25. A couple more to run through on this early version of the Edge Top 25 breakdown. Mentioned him earlier, but now we arrive at number 25. Jake Overman, junior tight end, 6'4", 247 pounds. Played in all 13 games this last year, had 7 catches for 51 yards. As I mentioned earlier, Overman's strength is in the blocking department. For how big he is, how strong he is, and how well he's able to move in space, it's almost like having another offensive lineman out there. I can distinctly remember many running plays where the Beavers would pull a tight end, or, have him get out there and block, and he would secure the block very well. As I mentioned earlier, I think there's some untapped potential with him as a receiver. I think it's very safe to say that he maybe hasn't had the greatest quarterback play during his, Oregon State tenure. So I'm kind of curious to see if he gets thrown to a little bit more, or if he's going to be kind of the de facto blocker. But either way, TJ, I think he plays a big time role, because at least one of Oregon State's tight ends, for how much they run, has to be a really good blocker.
Yeah, and you would imagine he's probably top 2 on the depth chart. If not, he's probably 1A, 1B with the guy we have at 21 on this depth chart in terms of who's going to get the most snaps on the field.
Yes.
It's just the question of, they evaluate a full fall. Is it more valuable for us to, line Jake Overman up as a blocker? Everyone thinks he might block, and then you can play action throw to him. Oh, well,
sure.
If we go 2 tight ends and Jack Velling's on the field as well, why wouldn't we just throw it to Jack? Because we know Jack's a pretty special pass catcher already. Or if Jermaine Terry really comes in during the fall, and he looks, he's fast, he looks like a receiver. Oh, okay, so Jake can come off, and we're going to go we're going to spread it out and go pass play, and we'll split Jermaine Terry out wide on a tiny little corner. and let him try and defend that. I mean, it just depends how, I guess, the strategy would work out in that case. But I think a lot, depends on what the coaches see from him in the fall, and if they see there's more inherent value in sending him out to pass, because there's some pretty good pass catchers on this top 25 that are also going to want the ball. So it's a question of who do we think is the most valuable or value of tossing him the football.
Yeah, no doubt. Like I said, I think, very steady is what I would say for describing Jake Overman. He's steady. He's consistent. Again, I think he's going to offer a lot this year because it goes, ever since Jonathan and Jim Mahalchuk arrived in 18, TJ, I know you weren't here, but it's one of those things where from day one, it didn't matter that the entire offensive line was Gary Anderson holdovers. Day one, Oregon State had an effective run blocking offensive line and effective run game. Jamar Jefferson was a freshman All-American, had 1,300 and some yards as a freshman, somewhere along that mark, and just had a great year. And Oregon State went 2-10 and were not very competitive, right? So it's one of those things where, you go back to even then, the tight ends that were left on the team, Noah Togiai at the time, others that were very key in just, the Beavers have always, since Jonathan and Jim Mahalchuk got here, have almost always valued having at least one of those two guys, as you mentioned, the 1A, 1B, having at least one who's a really good blocker. And I think that, Jake filled that role really well this last year, especially with Tegan Quatoriano the year prior graduating, because Tegan was kind of known as the more blocking tight end as Luke was the more receiving tight end. Those roles kind of flipped, and now we're at this point now where it's like Jake's a little bit more of the blocker, and as you mentioned, Jack Velling, who we'll get to in a little bit, it's a little bit more of a receiver. But I think they're all very interchangeable, and like I said, I think there's definitely a little untapped potential with Jake as a receiver. Let's move on to number 24, TJ. We arrive at Joe Golden, defensive lineman for his final go-around. He played with Oregon State this last year after transferring from Northern Colorado. Had an injury mid-season that kind of limited his effectiveness. So I know some might be looking at it and seeing that, he had only 4 tackles this last year, and we're like, how is this guy on the top 25? Well, I think it's because the injury that happened pregame warmups against Utah really kind of it took him out of action just when he was getting into his rhythm. He comes back. He obviously plays all season, but I really don't think we got to show what Joe Golden was able to do. He put on some weight. He's up to 292 pounds. I think he will be kind of that 5th offensive lineman this year, out of that rotation. And I think he'll play a key role. It's hard to say what, but the defensive line depth is better. And I think he'll have a solid season this year.
Fifth defensive lineman, you said?
Yes.
You mentioned offensive line, but it's okay. I think you would do okay. I think you would do okay on the offensive line.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Too.
Did I say
especially
offensive?
Especially bulks up that much. You did.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My bad.
It's been a long day for you.
Yeah, my apologies. Defensive lineman Joe Golden. My apologies.
No.
Continue, please. Yeah.
I think so too. Yeah, and I'd say this really just shows the depth they have along that defensive line, and in terms of since Jonathan's been here, you could argue this is the most guys. Yeah, the most guys that you're like, all right, like we have quality Division I defensive linemen on this line for with depth. Finally, here in Jonathan's what is it, 6th? So
yeah, this will be year 6.
6, yeah, right.
18,
so
19, 20.
And Joe Golden represents that. So it's always good to have some good run blocking, especially in this conference with some very, very talented backs.
Yeah, no, I had to do that math in my head too. It's like it's already his 6. It's crazy how quickly time flies, TJ. But yeah, no, I'm with you. I correct myself there, as you mentioned. Defensive lineman Joe Golden again. I think his effectiveness this last year was again limited by that kind of unfortunate injury that happened in warmups prior to the Utah game. I think based on what he was able to show at Northern Colorado, I know it's a bit of a talent difference in league play and all that, but he put up some pretty good numbers there. I think he's just going to provide key depth. I really do think the defensive line is going to be the best that it's been in Jonathan's tenure this year, which again, for those who have been paying attention since the very beginning of the Smith era, it's been a slow build, as TJ mentioned. I want to say there was something like 3 scholarship defensive linemen when Jonathan arrived, maybe 1 or 2 more than. It was very thin. They've had to do this piece by piece. And, I think that Joe's going to be just a quality depth piece this year. And I think his numbers will indicate that this year. Quickly get into the other 2 as we work our way up to 21. On this edition of the podcast, John McCartan checks in at number 23, TJ, outside linebacker. After missing the 2021 season with an injury, John came back in a big way last year. 34 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack, 5 quarterback hurries, 3 pass breakups, 6'5", 247 pounds. He's a big guy coming off the edge. I really do think that John's going to have another big year too. I like him to start at one of the outside linebacker spots, TJ, and he's again another culture keeper kind of guy. Been around for a long time, redshirt senior, and I imagine he's going to want to go out with a bang this year.
Yeah, only one other guy it looks like on the rest of this top 25 in the outside linebacker group that's above him. He is a pretty important part. There's going to be, Riley Sharp is on the other side of the ball now, so it's going to be a little bit more on John McCartan's shoulders. And this outside linebacker group has some important responsibility if this team wants to really generate more of a pass rush. I mean, those are some of the guys you're going to rely upon for edge pressure. And I think, here in his final season that John McCartan can take a step forward and really, really contribute in that.
Yeah, I think that McCartan and, Drew Chatfield, who we'll get to later in the rankings, are going to pretty much lock down those spots. We mentioned Corey Stover. I think he'll play a key role this year too, him being in our just missed as well. But no, I completely agree across the board and think that McCartan, those outside backers, and we also didn't mention, he didn't make our just miss, but Nico Taylor, the JUCO guy that they got this last year. Again, a little unknown to us, but I think he could add in that department. The Beavers do want to rush the quarterback a lot more this year, but there's a lot of uncertainty there outside of those guys that we mentioned. So I'm kind of curious to see how that depth chart ultimately shakes out. Coming in at number 22, TJ, Alton Julian. Hopefully the return of Alton Julian this year, as he had a bit of a bad injury luck. Again, had a ACL injury game 7 against Utah in 2021. Was expected to be back at some point this last year. Had, I don't want to necessarily call it a setback, but a little bit of what Jonathan said, things weren't progressing exactly the way that they liked. So they decided to shut him down, get him ready for this next season. Everything that we've heard and seen says he will be healthy by the start of fall camp. And if that's the case, it'd be huge, TJ, because Oregon State's defense hadn't yet taken the jump because it was still Tim Tibesar's defense in 2021. But at that time, Alton Julian was the highest graded defender per Pro Football Focus on Oregon State's defense. He was a stud. And I think if he can get back to the he's key, TJ. I really think that he's a guy that can make you really not feel the loss of Jaden Grant extremely, with Oladapo already back there on that other safety spot.
Yeah, they might not miss a beat at all with those 2 guys back there, which is really enticing. I would say that there could be the potential for. This might be the biggest risk of the top 25 because you could think of a worst case scenario where his knee throughout the season doesn't hold up and doesn't respond well. And he's not feeling well athletically and he doesn't look the same out there, in which case that's a tough sell for Alton Julian, but we hope that's not the case. And, I guess it didn't pay close enough attention to Alton Julian when I first got here. And I'm really intrigued to see him now back healthy on the field for this 2023 season, where he's going to have all the opportunity in the world to really take over Jaden Grant's spot and really exceed and, could do better than Jaden Grant. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, he was, really one of those guys from the College of San Mateo, right? The Beavers have really hit that college hard the last couple of recruiting cycles and found, success with guys. I mean, you're talking about Alton Julian, you're talking about Ryan Cooper this last year with Trice Ivy, who he was signed this last cycle, TJ, and I already saw him running with, pretty high level, first and second units in spring. So that college prepares kids very well, particularly in the defensive side of the ball. And, Oregon State's got a receiver coming in this year as well. So I think they really like that school. But I'm with you, a little bit of a risk on Alton's side. But no, I think ultimately that's going to be a big determinant. But I think if he's able to get back, it will be key. And real quickly to kind of wrap this up, we come in at number 21. We mentioned him earlier. Jack Velling, the sophomore, 6'4", 240-pound tight end from Seattle, Washington, the pride of TJ's neighborhood, Seattle Prep School. Played in 11 games this last year, 7 starts after Luke Musgrave's injury, 16 catches for 281 yards and 3 scores. I think that, it's one of those things where maybe it wasn't great last year. You're going to see the fruits of throwing him into the fire last year this season. I think he's going to have a really good year. I really do.
He has the potential to be way higher on this board, especially if he's getting, if they feel confident giving him the volume they gave Luke Musgrave, and he really responds, and he's really getting himself open, and he really, shows that he can be a dedicated receiver. I mean, again, at this point last year, if we, after one game of Luke Musgrave was a top 5 player on this roster. I mean, that's kind of the upside of having a tight end who's that valuable on your roster. So I think that's where Jack Velling could lead. I think it's super exciting to watch him play this year with a new quarterback.
Yeah, no doubt. It's going to be exciting. And there's a lot, like you said, the new quarterback's going to be intriguing as well. That's going to do it for this edition of the podcast. Make sure to stay tuned. TJ and I will be breaking down the rest of the list as summer goes on. TJ, enjoy the 4th weekend, man. And thanks to everyone for tuning in to this edition of the podcast. We'll be back soon.